So now that I'm satisfied with how my rocks are looking and, kind of the subtle effects that we've got going on, I'm going to go ahead and start defining some of our dirt color values. So to start that off, like we've already been doing, I'll just add a blend and making sure that I actually select the connection there. And to start off the dirt, what I want to do is add just a random grunge and then start using that to actually provide some color values. So I feel it's only fitting that for our dirt, we go ahead and use a dirt node, and I'm going to use a dirt 4. And I'll just plug that in and add a gradient node to this, or a gradient map. And this time, instead of just leaving it as a grayscale image, I want to go ahead and actually start defining some color values. So if we open up our gradient editor, go ahead and just click in to get our points. And so for the darker area, let's just do kind of like an off brownish kind of deal. And for our brighter value, let's maybe have a bit of a darker green. So we'll play around with those values in a sec, but I just wanted to get them set up so that now we can have something to see when we mask off our dirt. Because again, I don't want, the dirt to be over top of all of the hard work that we did for the rocks. And so in order to mask that off, again, I'm going to just come in and draw from our height mask. So I'll just control and click to steal that and plug that in. Now, unfortunately, we're going to have to invert the mask here. So that's not too bad. Just adding an invert grayscale node. And with this node, I want to do a little bit of kind of random destruction to it, because we can see that with our colors, it kind of looks like the rocks were just kind of almost placed, on top of the dirt rather than being immersed within the dirt. So to do that, I'm going to add a slope blur grayscale node. And for the slope, I'm going to use a fractal sum base. I know, surprise, surprise, shock and awe had by everyone. So I'll bring up the samples and decrease the intensity. And I'm going to leave it on blur. For our fractal sum, I'm just going to increase the max level to something like 12. And we can see it's maybe a little bit too tough to see it. So if we double click on that, single click back on our fractal sum, I'm going to want to bring the global opacity down, just so that we're kind of getting some noisy dusting kind of effect there. That's looking pretty cool. But we're going to get these kind of cracks right in between kind of where our rocks and our dirt kind of connect. So don't worry about that. We're going to take a look at that in a second. But let's go back to defining our color for our dirt here. So back in our gradient editor here, maybe find that our dirt's a little bit too dark, so I'll maybe bump up the value a little bit. I'm also going to add another value there. And let's see what that kind of looks like. Maybe having this kind of beigey color value there. We can play around with what that's going to look like, right? Maybe a little bit more brown overall. Maybe a little bit more green. Find that maybe the green's a little bit too dark as well. And so it's a matter of just playing around and obviously using real dirt for reference as well to get kind of the desired look for the colors. So I decided some color values just kind of in this range here was something that looked pretty okay for our grass and our dirt there. And now I want to take a look at actually defining some kind of interaction between the dirt and the rocks, right? Having some dirt kind of climb or crawl up these rocks here. So to do that, I'll add another blend, bring this over, and I'm just going to use a single solitary color for this. And so right now, I'll just leave it on something kind of like an ugly, very vibrant red that really doesn't make any sense here. But this is going to allow me to see when I'm developing the mask, just where the mask is actually interacting with. So to start off with our mask, I'm going to use our slope blur grayscale here and just plug that in. And now to kind of shift the gradient or the histogram, I'm actually going to use a histogram node. And I'm going to use a histogram select. So with the histogram select, you can see it's actually already kind of targeted the areas that we wanted, but we're going to be able to kind of move along a histogram and then select a range as well as the contrast, right? So I'm maybe going to want a little bit more range and kind of just target those kind of intersecting areas there. So that's looking pretty cool. Yeah, maybe play around, just get the sweet spot with the range and the position there. And so now that we have that, I'll go ahead and play around with the uniform color and add something a little bit more believable here. Then we're going to get something just kind of nice and a little bit more cohesive, right? We're going to get some dirt kind of climbing up these rocks. And so to complete our dirt, I just want to go ahead and add some small accent pieces just kind of around in various areas to add a little bit more intrigue without being, too overbearing and make the dirt kind of look like it's the primary factor here. So I'll quickly add my blend. And so in order to start developing these areas, I'm going to add another dirt node. And this time I'm going to use a dirt 3. Right? So it's just going to give us these kind of tiny little dots here. However, I'm going to want to kind of modify them a little bit. So I'll use a slope blur grayscale again, and I'm going to use the fractal sum base that we've already made to be our slope. We can crank those samples up, bring the intensity way down. How does the different modes look? And maybe I'll go with something like max. And play around with the disorder. Again, really doesn't matter too much because we're not using multiple nodes here. And I'll go and just plug this in. Now I'm going to want to use another uniform color just because the information's so small. I'm not going to waste trying to create a whole varying amount of colors for this. And you can see that, well, really it's not going to show up too much on our dirt because it's the same color. But if I do something like that, right? I'm going to add some splotchiness to the dirt. Now, unfortunately, it's also going to add some splotchiness to our rocks here. So in order to get rid of that, all I'm going to do is run this through a blend mode there. I'm going to take the socket or the connection out of there and plug this over top here. And I'm just going to hit subtract. So I stared at this for a good, I'll say 2 minutes before I realized that I didn't actually hit subtract. So we're going to want to do subtract, not multiply. Scared the hell out of me, to be honest, because I thought, oh no, I have no idea what I'm talking about. Just a misclick. So we want to make sure that this is subtract to get rid of those stones so that we're only going to have this showing up in our dirt. So now I can get rid of this really weird red color, and we can do something that's a little bit more natural to the environment, like neon green. No, I'm just kidding. We'll go and do a, a little bit of a darker, maybe off color green. Let's see, how does the green look compared to, yeah, we'll go with green. So maybe unnecessary depending on how your material is going, but I find that it adds just a little bit more color variation. So now that I'm satisfied with pretty much how our material is starting to shape up, I think it's about time we go ahead and start looking at how we're going to start defining color for our foliage. Now, so far we really haven't done much in terms of identifying or developing a mask for the foliage. And so initially I could assume that would cause a little bit of panic, right? Thinking, oh God, how am I going to have to actually develop a mask, right? Using histogram scans and histogram selects and ranges and all that. But because we use the shape splatter node over here to actually throw our foliage all around, it actually provides, like I was showing you in the previous video, a pretty easy tool to allow us to mask shape splatter items rather effectively. So to do that, I'm going to type in shape splatter again. Right, and if you can kind of recall from the last video, this shape splatter to mask. So when I select that, you can see that the only input it's going to allow is this shape splatter 1 node, or this connection there. Well, that's going to actually correspond to the shape splatter node, and that's why we can only use shape splatter with shape splatter. Geez, say that 5 times fast. So I'm going to select the shape splatter data 1 and plug that in. And you can see it's going to give us not only a mask of where all of our foliage is, but it's actually going to be in relation to how it's been blended in our height map. So that's really cool, and that's really handy, that we're not going to have to try and figure out, oh geez, where is our foliage, intersecting, and where is it maybe, being cut off, and try and mask that off. What's really cool about this shape splatter to mask node as well is that it actually allows us to take each one of these inputs and provide a separate mask for it, so that it's going to allow us to, well, mask them off individually. Say we want to add different colors, which in 5 minutes time is exactly what I'm going to show you. So with this mask, you can see it's only really showing this one particular, right, the first input there. So we have to change the pattern ID end range, because right now it's starting at 1 and ending at 1. But I can change this up to 2. So now it's going to show us the first 2. Or I can bring this up to 3, and it's going to show us all 3. I can also have it, change the starting range. So now it's only going to show us the second and third option, or the third option there. So that's one way you could go about doing it, is adding a couple of these, right? 3 different or 4 different of these shape splatter to mask nodes, each with a different range as to, whichever shape you want to utilize. However, I'm going to do it just a slightly different way. And again, there's no better or worse way. The only reason I want to do it the way I'm going to do it is I don't want to have to bring all of these over or leave them over here and start playing around with connections. And so the method I'm going to choose instead is right on this output here. You can see it's got binary mask. And the binary mask is going to just give us all of our foliage as one white value. I'm going to go ahead and instead choose grayscale values. And so what that's going to do is take each output and provide a different grayscale value for it. So now you can see if I plug this into a histogram select, and I just bump the contrast all the way up and take the range all the way down. Okay, maybe not down that much. We'll bring it up just a little bit. As I scrub through the positions, you can see I'm going to be able to select all of the first leaf there, all of the second leaf, and finally, if I go up a little bit more, all of the third leaf. And so this is the way I'm going to do it, is just by utilizing multiple different histogram selects rather than having to play around with, multiple shape splatter to mask. So really it's your preference there, but it's very, very flexible and very powerful by using this mask. So I'm going to leave this right here, and I'll just call this foliage mask so we know where it is. And now I'll go ahead and just bring this guy right over here. So now to start developing our leaves, I'm really not going to spend too much time on developing color, again, because they're relatively small. And so if we try and introduce a lot of color information into it, it's really going to just muddy the overall design. So I just want to add a few simple, subtle color layers that is just going to convey the essence and the idea that this is foliage. So I'll add a couple blend nodes onto our chain here, particularly 3, right? 1 for each of the foliage that we have. And I'm going to duplicate this 2 more times. So the first one here, I'm just going to want to change the position all the way back down to where we have our leaves there, our first leaves, and we'll plug that in. Plug this guy in and make sure that it is our second leaves there, and this one for our third. Now I'm just going to steal this color here, plug it in, and you can see immediately, right, it's going to just find all of those different first patterns and start to color them in. So that's pretty sweet, and that's really, really cool. I'll plug that one in too, and we'll plug this guy in. So now I'm not going to want to leave them as that really, really green color. And I want to give them all their kind of own variation of color. So for the first pattern, let's make it a very desaturated green here. Maybe add a little bit more vibrance to it. Kind of something like that. Right, and it's maybe a little bit difficult to tell. Maybe add a different skybox in. And that made it even harder, but let's take a look at maybe over top here. There we go. So you can see it's a little bit desaturated, but looking pretty sweet. For the second piece here, or if I can find it there, there we go. Right, these a little bit fatter foliage. Again, I'm going to want to maybe desaturate it, make it a little bit brighter. Maybe change the hue as well, just so that it's not kind of the same vein of color there. And that's looking pretty cool. And finally, for our last pieces here, our thinner, kind of almost leaf-like shapes, I'm going to make this more of a reddish kind of color. Give it more of like an autumn feel. We'll bring this down. Desaturate it just a little bit. Actually, that's already looking not too bad. Now maybe just a little bit more desaturation. Something kind of like that. Right, so that we're going to get just a variation of colors to help us break things up a little bit more. Now to give the foliage a little bit more of a sharper look to it, we can take a look in our 2D, right, and see that, well, they're just single colors. So let's add a little bit more detail. Not too much though, again remember, subtlety, but give some definition to these foliage. So adding a blend, I'm going to go and steal a color, and actually I didn't have to go too far, we'll just steal that one right there, and plug this in. And I'm going to make this just a bit of a brighter white value, because again, we're going to want to use this as an overlay to just kind of brighten up the values that already exist. And so I'm going to go ahead and find where we created our curvature here. And I'm just going to duplicate that guy and bring him over. So I'm going to use this curvature to really accentuate some of the faces of our leaves, right? We can see that we're going to get some of those, you know, kind of stems or the cracks or kind of the leaflets of the faces there. And as I increase this intensity to something like 10, right, we're really going to create a more binary mask. Now I'm going to want a mask like this so that when I plug this in, you can see we're starting to define some of those faces and those crevices just a little bit more. Now obviously that's starting to define our entire material, right? And everything's looking kind of sharp and kind of weird. So we're going to need to just mask that off. So I'll add a blend. And we're going to need to use a mask that has all of the leaves together. So I could go back all the way to our foliage mask, or I could just select one of these histograms here and duplicate that. And I want to make sure, again, like I said, this is just going to get all of our leaves. So this is going to get our first to our third pattern. And I'll plug this in over top. And now I'm going to use this kind of like a mask of a mask almost, right? I'm going to use this to define the areas with which I want our curvature to actually show up. And so because I have white values, what I'm going to do is just select multiply, right? So it's going to essentially get rid of anything that's a white value in this top node here, and then you replace it with whatever is in the bottom. So because we have the leaves in the exact same area, right? That's going to allow us to define a mask like this. So that now we can go ahead, and I'm going to bring this overlay way down to something like 0.35, just so that it's a very, very subtle effect, but it's going to give some information for these guys. And I'm realizing that we maybe didn't capture, we didn't capture that guy there. So maybe bring the contrast down. And it seems that maybe that's not even going to work. So what I'll have to do is instead just select this guy here, use a histogram scan. Make sure to select all of that so that now we're going to get all of those pieces. And I'm just going to delete that guy and plug it in its place. So that now we can see, yep, this is going to pop up and capture all of our foliage. So I'm finding that our foliage is still standing out a little bit, right? It's a little bit non-cohesive, I'll say, to the rest of the material. So to finish this up, I'll add a blend node. And I'm going to go and grab where we've created our dirt gradient here and plug this in over top. Again, just adding some cleanup there. I'm also going to use our newly created mask here to plug into that so that it's going to show up over top of only our leaves. And for the blend mode, I'm just going to come down and select soft light, and I'll bump it down to something like 0.6. Now again, maybe a little bit negligible, but I find that it adds some detail and really helps promote these pieces to be part of our final material. And with all of that, I like to make sure that my colors are PBR safe. So I'll just go ahead and add a PBR Albedo safe color, and I can just leave it at 0.5 there. But this is going to allow me to make sure that all of my color values are not really in drastic or crazy ranges that are going to kind of break the PBR workflow. In this video, we took a look at starting to define and ultimately completing our first output map, being our base color or albedo. In the next video, we'll take a look at finalizing our roughness map to really hone in on the characteristics of the surfaces of this material.